Following our learning, you're welcome to join us for any number of services in the building. There's a bar mitzvah in the sanctuary, followed by lunch, followed by Parsha study. I think the meditation group is meeting this morning. So you're all welcome to join. Not this morning? Last week. It was wonderful last week. I haven't woken up quite yet, so. Yeah, it's okay. This week, let's see, Monday evening, we're welcoming our friends from the Jewish Republican Alliance, and they're bringing Larry Elder, who's a talk show radio host on KRLA. It's a nominal fee to get in. That'll begin at 7:30. Everyone who'd like to come is welcome to hear Mr. Elder. Wednesday night is Purim. We're going to talk about the holiday in a moment. But it's a wonderful celebration of goofy Jews. It's our goofy night. So 5 o'clock here in the Weiner Chapel, the Minyan service meets with a full reading of the Megillah, traditional Purim. At 5:30 in the Sher Lapati room, we welcome little kids, all the nursery school and kindergartners, for a special Purim. And then at 7 o'clock, the whole community will gather for a community celebration. Every year, Cantor Barron creates a set of songs for Purim. This year, he's working off of Broadway show tunes. So come dressed as your favorite Broadway show. Come dressed as your favorite Broadway character, right? I'm coming as the nun from The Sound of Music. So, the hills are alive. I thought that was appropriate. Anyway, and we'll sing together. We'll have a wonderful, silly time. And they're Hamantash. Of course, here now, Hamantash used to be, Hamantash. It was a Hamantash, is raspberry and apricot. And if you had guts, mun, and prune, poppy seeds, mun, and then prune. And now you get. Someone sent me a flyer for, but it's more than that. It's cage-free, non-GMO, gluten-free, high protein, high fiber, Belgian chocolate, sea salt, pluralistic, gun-free, I don't know, gay vase, it's a strange world we live in. But there's still Hamantash, so come and have a Hamantash and celebrate the sweetness of Purim. That's going to be on Wednesday night, and of course Thursday morning, those who like to come back will read the Megillah in its total in the morning, okay? And then next Friday night is a quiet night here in the shul. We have little kids here. Torah study in the morning. Yeah, yes, question.
I'm going to come as Don Quixote.
That would be good, yeah. Don Quixote. That would be good. Just don't leave, don't bring the lance, because we'll stop you at the door.
No groggers?
No, groggers, that's a good thing. This year we're doing something different with groggers, as we did last year. Instead of groggers, bring a box of macaroni, and after you use it as a grogger, we'll give it to the food bank. Because it is a beautiful tradition. Not only do you make a lot of noise and have fun at the holiday, but there's a tradition of matanot le'evyonim, of caring for the poor and the needy in the community. And the way we do that is by supporting the food bank. We have a food bank here in the building that's part of the network that's supported by SOVA. And we serve about 700 families in a month. So we're always collecting food. We're the regional branch of SOVA, basically. So families in need within a catchment area of about 10 miles from as far away as Pacoima and Sylmar, and east and west, come here. There's a very, very nice, responsible system for how this is done. You don't know who the people are who are coming for food. They look like everybody else coming to the synagogue, and they're treated that way. Their dignity is preserved, but we're feeding 700 families a month. So bring a box of macaroni, like macaroni and cheese, that rattles when you shake it, right? Or a box of Cheerios if it rattles or something. And you'll use that as a grogger, and then you'll put it in the food bank, and we'll be able to continue to serve those families. Okay? That's what's going on in the shul. And then in 4 weeks is Pesach. Oh, God. Oh, good. So you have to go buy a sheep. You can put the blood on the lintel. No, 4 weeks is Pesach. So I'm going to announce now the beginning of this year's version of the Rabbi Feinstein Memorial Pesach Contest. I'm looking for the most interesting Passover product you can find. Okay, so the first year we announced this, our dear teacher, Rabbi Shulweiss of blessed memory, brought back from New York a kosher for Passover lipstick for his wife. She who had been spending all the time cleaning the kitchen, he who was at some academic conference in New York, he brought back lipstick. She was not impressed. The second year, our dear friend Murray Geller of blessed memory brought us fettuccine Alfredo, kosher lepesach, just like our ancestors ate when they were slaves. The third year, my former son-in-law brought us gefilte fish flavored gummy candies. Well, you know, you want a snack that tastes like gefilte fish. You know, you pop one of these. The next year, our colleague, your nephew, Matt Rudda, Rabbi Matt Rudda, brought us Ben & Jerry's Haroset flavored ice cream. It's a real product. Kosher lepesach, Haroset flavored ice cream, yeah. No, it's a marvelous thing. It's great. And then last year, I think Paul Lewis, or I forgot who won the I think it was Paul. It wasn't a food product. It was. We took a little detour. It was, believe it or not, a toilet seat cover that looked like matzah. And the best part was that stenciled across it were the words, "Let my people go." It was hard to top that. I mean, so as you begin planning for Passover, you start shopping, you're looking in the various stores. If you see a product that you go, "Oh my God, buy it, I'll pay you for it," you can enter the contest and you too can be in the Pesach Hall of Fame here at Valley Beth Shalom. So it would be, imagine the envy of your neighbors when they discover it. All right, I hope everybody is well. Ron reminds us, our dear friend Gordon Freeman, who usually sits right there, has been in hospital for the last 2 weeks. He had a serious stroke. I've been talking to his daughter, and he is apparently still with us. I mean, he responds. He has a hard time expressing himself, but he's responding, and they're taking good care of him. But we pray for Gordon, and we hope that he returns to us very, very soon. Gordon is a really sweet soul, was a physician for 50 years, 60 years in the community, and is in his 90s, but still a vital member of the community. So we pray for Gordon's health and his well-being. Today is Parshas Tetzaveh. We're in the middle of the third section of the book of Exodus, but more important, today's Shabbat Zachor, which is the Shabbat that leads us to the celebration of Purim. I think there's a seat right here. If somebody would like to come in. There's two. We got two on the aisle right here. Come on. It's dangerous to be standing while a rabbi talks. You could doze off and hurt yourself, so come on in. Shabbat Zachor. So just before we get into the text this morning, there's a change in the order of the synagogue. The Haftarah, the prophetic section for the Sabbath, every Shabbat has a Haftarah, has a section of the prophets that's read alongside the section from the Torah. And because it's Shabbat Zachor, which means that the Maftir, the extra Torah section, commemorates the eternal battle against Amalek. Amalek was a desert there's a seat right here, was a desert warrior tribe, and they were the first people to attack us on our way out of Egypt. They're the first tribe to attack Israel in its formation as a nation. And according to the Torah, they violated the rules of warfare. In the desert, there were certain rules about how you engaged in warfare, and there was a sort of gentlemanly way of conducting a war. And the gentlemanly way of conducting a war was that if you raided a caravan, you hit it from the front, which means you hit its warriors. You do not hit the women and children in the back. That's the gentlemanly way of doing war. And Amalek violated that ethic and attacked Israel from the back, destroying women and children. So Amalek becomes, in the imagination first of the Torah and then of the later tradition, the quintessential model of the enemy of the Jewish people. Every enemy of the Jewish people is said to be a descendant of Amalek. So once upon a time, this was a real tribe, but then it becomes this sort of model. It becomes the paradigmatic collective enemy of the people, and the paradigmatic embodiment of evil in the world. Haman is the descendant of Amalek. And we know this because in the book of Kings, there's a sort of genealogy of Amalek, and the king of Amalek is called Agag, and Haman in the Purim story is referred to as Agagi. He is a descendant of Amalek. So that's why he hates us so much. That's the idea. And on through history, every enemy becomes... And the Maftir says that your obligation is to destroy Amalek, to go out and fight evil, and to destroy evil in the world. Now, the Haftarah that was chosen for this week is a Haftarah that comes from the book of Samuel. And it tells the story of the King Saul, who was the first king of Israel. Not a terribly effective king, sort of a precursor to the great kings, to David and Solomon. And apparently there is a branch of the Amalek tribe living in Canaan at the time of Saul's reign, and Saul goes to war against these people. And he is commanded by the prophet Samuel to destroy them completely, to commit genocide against this tribe, and he doesn't do it. He saves the king and some of his retinue. And when Samuel shows up and sees that the king is still alive and some of the animals and some of the members of the tribe are still alive, he castigates Saul and says, for this you're going to lose your kingship. The philosopher, and then he kills the king horribly. That's the Haftarah. That's the Haftarah. The philosopher Martin Buber did a translation of the Hebrew Bible into German. Very important translation. And he wrote in his commentary and in an article that he wrote alongside of it that of all the stories that he found in the Bible, this was the one he found most disturbing. The idea that a king would be commanded to commit genocide and then castigated, to be blamed because he didn't do it, because he showed mercy, and that somehow God is on the side of murder, not on the side of mercy. Buber says this is a story somebody stuck in. This is a nationalist story, a chauvinist story, but it's not a divine story. I refuse to believe this is actually part of the Bible. However, this is the Haftarah for this Shabbos morning. So Rabbi Schulweis, my teacher, and our teacher, who was a student of Buber, decided that we would not read that story as the Haftarah. So every year when we come to this Haftarah, every synagogue in America is reading this story. Some little bar mitzvah kid's going to read about genocide. And VBS is going to read something different. And what Schulweis chose to read is the 19th chapter of the book of Isaiah, principally because the last two lines in that chapter, Isaiah, or God through Isaiah, says to the people of Israel, there will come a day when Egypt and Assyria and Israel will all come together as one. There'll be a road leading from Egypt to Assyria and Assyria to Egypt, and all three will see themselves as children of God. And Schulweis felt that that notion, that the way that you defeat Amalek in the world, the way that you defeat evil in the world, is not by committing genocide against a tribe, but by bringing enemies together as one. That you defeat evil by sponsoring good, not by committing crimes. And so that's what we read for our Haftarah this morning. So there's a sheet in every pew this morning, and that's what the kid learned for his Haftarah. And so if you're in any other shul this morning, you'll be reading the story of genocide, and I want you to raise your hand and ask the rabbi, Jews celebrating genocide? Come on, right? But here we're going to read this other story. So that's the answer to your question, okay? So this morning, we're going to read Tetzaveh. Parshat Tetzaveh is the second half of what we started last week. It's the story of the creation of the Mishkan, of the shrine in the desert. And it begins with a commandment to create a menorah. And then that menorah is supposed to have a certain kind of olive oil, and that's the beginning of the parsha. Those of you who are into extra virgin olive oil, shop at Trader Joe's, will enjoy the beginning. There's a coupon in the Torah for Trader right there. And the rest of it talks about the haberdashery of the priest, what the priests wear. It's sacred haberdashery, holy wardrobe. And it gives you all the outfit of the priests, right? And you can buy one, by the way, for Purim or Halloween right up the street. And headdress, breastplate. And you can read it. It's an interesting set of things. But what's interesting today is that because it's Shabbat Zachor, the maftir, the extra section deals with Amalek. And we're talking this week about Purim. And I thought we would take this morning, and I would again skillfully evade having to read this priestly stuff, and we would study the book of Esther, which is the book that we're going to read on Wednesday night for Purim. So I gave you a little bit of Esther. The book of Esther is 9 chapters long. I gave the whole thing to you in 2 pages. This is not the whole book. This is the Reader's Digest, heavily condensed version, and you can see that I smushed the print way down so that anybody over the age of 45 is going to have a hard time reading it, only because I didn't want to use any more paper. But let's enjoy this book. This is one of the great interesting books of the Bible, because it's one of the books of the Bible that as you're reading it, you stop and say, huh? So you can all say that to begin with. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Huh? Good, because the question is, why is it here? This is, at the end of the Hebrew Bible, we have a section of writings, right? Well, miscellaneous books. Psalms are prayers of loyalty to God. Proverbs are wise sayings. And there's 5 short books called Megillot. They belong to the holidays that we celebrate. Each Megillah is attached to a holiday. The Megillah of Purim, Megillah means scroll. So in synagogues, traditionally, there were 5 scrolls at the back of the ark. One of them was Megillat Esther, which is read on Purim. One of them is Ruth, which is read on Shavuot. One of them is Kohelet, Ecclesiastes, which is read on Sukkot. One of them is Lamentation, Echa, a sad book read on Tisha B'Av, the national day of grieving and mourning. And then, of course, the Shir HaShirim, a very sensual, sexy love poem, which is read on Passover. Because after 2 nights of matzah, who isn't in the mood for love? Right? Who doesn't feel sexy after matzah, prunes, and apricots? Right? What? Let my people go, right. And then we have this book of Esther. Now, this book of Esther is a remarkable book. And I'm going to suggest to you that it's read, it shows you how wide the ideological spectrum of the Bible really is. The Bible, let me put it this way. My professor was one of my teachers, one of Nina's teachers, was the great Nachum Sarna, Professor at Brandeis. And the opening line of his book on Genesis is, the Bible is not an ideological monolith, meaning it doesn't have just one point of view. The Bible is your Seder table, right? Where your family sits around discussing whether Trump is the best or worst thing ever to happen to America, whether Netanyahu should be enshrined as a saint or go to jail, whether the Jewish people will survive and thrive in the next generation or disappear, whether or we should all become Orthodox, we should all become Reformed, we should all just become. I mean, whatever happens at your Seder table, that's the Bible. It's a vibrant argument and conversation about the deepest issues of human existence. It's not one point of view. If you want one point of view, you're in the wrong religion. Okay? We don't have a pope. You knew that, right? Don't look at me like I'm crazy. We don't have a pope. There's no cat in Rome or Jerusalem or New York who calls balls and strikes, right? We don't have one guy who says, you got to believe this or you're out of the pool. You know, I told you once, the funniest thing in the world is that in Israel, there's a guy who calls himself the chief rabbi. But the funniest thing is, there's 2. Only the Jews would have 2 chief rabbis. So this guy strokes his long, learned beard and says, I think this is kosher. And the other guy says, what, you crazy? What, mishugata? What? Say, look, kasher, this is kosher, this isn't kosher. And if you, by the way, ever look on the box of matzah, get a box of egg matzah and look at the side panel. There's a whole argument about whether you can eat this stuff on Pesach. That doesn't stop them from selling it to you, by the way. It just stops them from endorsing it, right? Because we're always debating these things. Now, when we get to Esther, what I'm going to suggest to you is the first line is the line that gives it all away, right? Take a look with me at the first line of the book. Ready? I'll be right with you, Billy. It happened in the days of Achashverosh. King Achashverosh occupied the royal throne in the fortress Shushan. In the 3rd year of his reign, he gave a banquet for all of his officers and courtiers. For no fewer than 180 days, he displayed the vast riches of his kingdom, the splendid glory of his majesty. At the end, he gave a banquet for 7 days for all the people who lived in Shushan, high and low alike. And on the 7th day, when the king was merry with wine. That's how the story begins. Now think about how the Torah begins. Breshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. In the beginning, God created heaven and earth. The Torah begins with the idea that the world is the dwelling place of a God of justice. And the question that the Torah is going to argue and fight with all through its 5 books is, what does it mean to live with a living God? What does it mean to construct a society in the light of that God? What does it mean to conduct history? What is history with a God of justice in the world? We just finished learning that whole story of the Exodus from Egypt. What are the implications of a God who has a stake in human history, of a God who insists on justice? What does it mean to have a God who says, I'm freeing my people, and if you get in my way, I have 10 plagues to destroy you? That's what the Torah is about. The image of the Torah is, what does it mean to live with a God of justice, to live in the shadow or the light of that God? And you are taught in that world, because there's a God of justice, Abraham is told, Hayeh bracha, be a blessing. So the Torah is all about how to be a blessing in a world where there's a God who cares. Esther whispers the most radical question at the beginning. What if there is no God? What if there is no God of justice, no God of mercy? What if there is no God who has a stake in human history? What if it's all random? The name of the holiday is Purim. Purim is a Persian word meaning throw of the dice, turn of the wheel of fortune, twist of the roulette wheel. What if the world is random? What if the world is arbitrary? What if there is no power, no force, no inclination toward justice in the world? What if it's all a question of power politics? What if it's all just random? What's your obligation? Is your obligation to do justice in a world that's random? How do you do justice in a world that's random? How do you do justice in a world that's arbitrary? How do you do justice in a world that doesn't care whether you suffer or celebrate? That doesn't care. A world that doesn't care. So where God rules the world of the Torah, Achashverosh rules the world of Esther, of this book. And where God demands justice, let my people go, Achashverosh is drunk all the time. In every scene of the book, when the king shows up, he's smashed, he's drunk, he's loaded. It's all one big party for Achashverosh. One big orgy. And the question is, what does justice mean in that kind of world? What are you obligated to do? Who are you obligated to be? What does it mean? And what happens when you have this idea that no one's listening? Right? I don't know if you watched these beautiful kids this week. I don't know what's going to come of this. And I'm not endorsing anything. I mean, I happen to think that young kids with assault weapons is not a good idea. But I guess I might not be in the majority in America to believe that. But listening to those poor kids just say, is anybody listening? Is anybody listening? The kid who confronted Rubio, did you see this? And the kid basically says, are you listening to me? And Rubio kept saying, giving his political talking points. And the teenager who had no politeness, which why I love teenagers, the kid just said, shut up, and are you just listening to me? Are you listening to us? Are you there? You know, hello, are you there? You ever try to call anything, you ever called United Airlines on the and they, you know, put in your number, put in your ID number, put in your ticket number, put in your social security number, put in your mother's maiden name, you know. Push 1 if you want this, push 2. I have this nightmare. That's what heaven is like, you know. When you die, it's push 1 if you're Jewish, push 2 if you're, push 1 if you're a Hasidic, push 2. I want to talk to God, you know. Hang on 1 minute. Well, you know, the wait time is 5,778 years, you know. I mean, you know, but this idea of what if that's the world? So the question, I find that this book, the holiday is the goofiest holiday we have. We dress in masks, we bring noisemakers. You're even supposed to get schnockered yourself. You know, you're supposed to bring a little schnapps to shul, and share it with your rabbi. You're supposed to bring it to shul, and you're supposed to get like loaded. And it's ironic because, and here's the irony of the holiday, it's the goofiest holiday, and it's the goofiest book in the Bible, hands down the goofiest book. Because it contains the most deadly question. What if there is no God? What if there is no justice? What if there is no moral order? What if there is no power behind us when we demand the right? are you still going to do what's right? Is there any sense in doing what's right? Right? Is there any sense in doing what's right? This is when I argue with teenagers, I do this a lot. I spend my career arguing with teenagers. This kid says, I don't believe in God. I love that. So I always say to him, good. And he says, what do you mean good? You're supposed to argue with me. I say, well, I'm not supposed to argue with me. I'm off duty now. I can be honest. You're a teenager. You're not supposed to believe in anything, right? I say to the kid, you give charity? Kid says, yeah. Where do you give charity? He says, well, my mom had cancer, so we give to the American Cancer Society. How do you know cancer can be cured? What if the world has an even amount of suffering in it, and if we cure cancer, some other disease will come take its place? Look, there was once tuberculosis, we cured that. Then polio showed up, we cured that. Then AIDS showed up, more or less cured that. Then Ebola showed up, we've done something about that. Now something else is showing up, right? What if there's an even amount of suffering in the world and you can't do a damn thing about it? Would you still give charity? Kid says, I don't believe that. I said, how do you know? He says, I believe we can cure diseases. We can lower the net amount of suffering in the world. I said, that's a faith statement. That's not an empirical judgment. You can't prove that. Your belief that you can lower the amount of suffering in the world, that you can ameliorate human suffering, is a faith statement. That's what motivates charity. One could make the exact opposite argument. You stopped a war in one side of the world and you started a war in another one. There's always something going on. There always seems to be genocide somewhere on the planet. Maybe that's just the way the world is set up to be. In other words, one could be very cynical if one wanted to. How do you defeat cynicism? So the question of the book of Esther is, if you really didn't know for sure, would you still do what was right? Would you still give charity? Would you still believe that justice could happen? Would you still extend yourself for other people? If you really didn't know, if in the end there was any way to really ameliorate the world's suffering. And the image you start at the beginning is not a world with a God who cares, but Achashverosh. Achashverosh, by the way, historically, this is not a historical book, but there are historical hints. Okay, historically, and you can tell me if I'm wrong. How do you say Artaxerxes in Persian? It sounds like Achashverosh. Yeah, so for a Hebrew speaker, the name Artaxerxes, that's the name of a great Persian king, in Persian sounds like Achashverosh. It also sounds like a sneeze. So it's King Sneeze, right? So King Sneeze is drunk. He controls the world. He rules the world, right? And he's drunk. He has a 6-month World's Fair to show off all the stuff that he's stolen from all the kingdoms that he's conquered. Anyone ever been to the Louvre? Or the British Museum's even better. The British Museum is, we're so civilized. We went to Greece and we stole the friezes right off the Parthenon, and then we went to Egypt and stole all the tombs of the kings, and then we went to Syria and stole the gates of Babylon, and then we tried to steal America, but you wouldn't let us. Damn it. So you'll have to go to Smithsonian to see that stuff. But we're proud of the British Museum. We're the most civilized people in the world, having stolen everything worth stealing, Right. Anything we don't have, Napoleon stole, and you have to go to the Louvre to see it. Civilization, of course, right. Right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. On the 7th day, he gives a wine feast for the whole town. The town is called Shushan. Was there a place called Shushan in Persia? Shush. Now, here's why it's funny. Because when you write the word Shushan in Hebrew, it's Shin Shin Vav Nun, which is the word sason, which means joy. The happiest place on earth. That sound familiar? Right? It's a world. What? Yeah, but when you write it out, it's sason. It's the same word. It's the same word. Yes, it's the same word. It's happiness. It's the happiest place on earth. It's a place where you're not allowed to speak a mean word. Remember the song Camelot, right? You're not allowed to say anything negative in this town. Everything has to be smiles, everyone. It's a place where everyone's always happy. We don't want to hear bad news, ever. Right? This is happy news. The newspaper always has good things. right? No fake news, all just good things, right? No CNN. Jake Tapper doesn't belong in Shushan, right? Maybe New York, but Shushan is a happy place. New York is a place where you get nothing but bad news. But Shushan is only a happy place. It's this hypnotized place, right? And so everyone is just blasted, the whole town, because everyone's been drinking for a week. And on the last day, right, where am I? Verse 10. On the seventh day, when the king was merry with wine, he ordered Queen Vashti to come before the king, wearing a royal crown to display her beauty to the people and the officials, for she was a beautiful woman. Right? Now, of course, the Midrash says when he said, come down wearing your crown, he said, come down wearing only your crown. And so he's showing off everything that he's taken from the world. He wants to show her off too. Right? But Queen Vashti refused to come. Damn, uppity women. This is, by the way, the whole story is uppity women, right? So what shall be done according to the law to Queen Vashti? So this is the biggest problem in the kingdom. What do we do with an uppity queen? Right? War and peace, life and death, income, money? No, that's easy. Those are easy questions. What do you do with Melania, who won't come on the trip? That's the problem, right? The king consulted the sages learned in procedure. The Persian court was well known for being really deep into the details of law. Persian lawyers in the ancient world were like these people who knew like volumes. There's all these traditions of what do you do when, right? Right? What should happen? Thereupon Memucan is a saris, he is a eunuch. It turns out that the eunuchs are the only real men in this kingdom, right? You'll see that. And the women are the only real men in the kingdom, right? Memucan, Queen Vashti has committed an offense not only against your majesty and against all men in the province, but against all men in the provinces. For the queen's behavior will make all wives despise their husbands. This is a problem, by the way. As they reflect that King Ahasuerus himself ordered Queen Vashti to be brought before him, and she wouldn't come this very day. The ladies of Persia and Media who have heard of the queen's behavior will cite it to your majesty's officials, and there'll be no end to scorn and provocation. Uppity women! Let a royal edict be issued by you, and let it be written in the laws of Persia and Media that Vashti never enter the presence of King Ahasuerus again. What is her punishment? She doesn't have to sleep with him ever again. What has Memucan just done? By flattering the king, he saved her life. You know, she doesn't have to sleep with him ever again. Right? Put her at the top of the tallest tower in New York and keep her there. And let your majesty bestow her royal state upon another who's more worthy than she. Then all wives will treat their husbands with respect. There you have it. Third generation feminism, right? Now you're reading this and you're saying, what is this doing in the Bible? This is Bible. This is Tanakh. This is Holy Scripture. What the heck am I talking about? A blasted, drunk king and his uppity wife, and the legal disposition of the uppity. You get the sense of weirdness here? Are you not getting the sense of weirdness here? If you're not getting the sense of weirdness, you're not enjoying this book. Because you're coming from shul, you're in synagogue. Torah, kedoshim tihiyu, be holy. Okay? You know, they're going to tell the wrong thing about this. If this discovered they're in the wrong shul, I think. Like, who is this crazy person? But this is the point of the book of Esther is to say, this is the universe you're in now, right? This is the universe. This is not a universe governed by a God who demands justice. This is a universe governed by a drunk king who's more worried about his beautiful wife's dancing abilities than he is about justice. That's the world you live in. Now, how do you do justice in that world? Bill?
This is the only book of the Bible not found in the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Really?
Yeah.
And the interesting, the Talmud has this thing that when Messiah comes, we'll have no more holidays except Purim. So it's the only book that's going to be read after Mashiach comes. And of course, it's the only book that doesn't have God anywhere in it. Except, is God in it? That's going to be the great question. So what do they decide to do? Now, this is good Keystone Cops kind of thing, where every action brings another cycle of action, which is more absurd than the action it's slapstick, is what it is, right? So sometime afterwards, when the anger of Achashverosh subsided, he thought of Vashti. You know, poor lone Achashverosh, sitting in his big kingly bed all by himself. And he misses her, right? Because she may have been uppity, but she was fun to cuddle with, right? And so the king's servant said, let beautiful young women be sought out for your majesty. Let them be provided with cosmetics. Cosmetics show up a lot in this. It's like something like paint, you know? And let the maiden who pleases your majesty be queen instead of Vashti. The proposal pleased the king, and he acted upon it. So what did they do? They drafted every young eligible woman in the kingdom to be the queen. They bring them all into the harem. Yes?
It seems to me
Yes?
he always needs advice from others.
Yes.
He's not really in control.
No.
He's always drunk, so
Yes.
he's listening to other people.
Yes.
Advice.
Imagine that, you know? You're right. And it's always, and you'll see in a minute that it's always the eunuch standing right next to him who whispers in his ear, and he's the only guy in the kingdom who really can see anything. He's the only man in the kingdom who has courage, who has a trying to be appropriate here. I'm trying very hard to be appropriate in a book that's very inappropriate. So this is what happens, all right? So we've introduced the king. That's character number one. Yes, please.
So a eunuch is giving him advice on women.
Yes, exactly right. You get the picture?
What a story.
There you go, baby. It's going to get better. Wait. Buckle your seatbelt. In the fortress Shushan lived a Jew by the name of Mordechai. Everybody say, yay. Good. Son of Yair, he was foster father to Hadassah. She was named for her mother's favorite organization. That is Esther. Many of us have a Hebrew name and an English name that are different. She has a Jewish name, a Hebrew name, Hadassah, and a Persian name, Esther. His uncle's daughter, for she had neither father nor mother. The maiden was shapely and beautiful, and when her father and mother died, Mordechai adopted her as his own daughter. Now that's a strange scenario. We could spend some time on this. Like, where else in the Bible do you have an older man with a beautiful young woman? And what are they doing with each other? And how is she living in his house, unmarried, and what?
David,
Well, you have Ruth and Boaz. You have now he's Yehudi. He's Mordechai HaYehudi, Judah and Tamar. All this really kind of, what? You know, it's a little strange, right? That she's living there, and who is she to him, and why is she living there? Why doesn't he have a wife and a family? Doesn't she have? I mean, it's a little strange. It's very strange. But we get him here. Now, the most important thing are the names. The names. Mordechai and Esther. Where do you get these names from? Mordechai is derived from Marduk. Who is Marduk? Marduk is the patron god of the Babylonians. The Babylonians are the people who destroyed Jerusalem and sent us into exile. So we are, and of course, I didn't give you the whole genealogy, but we're 3 generations away from that destruction. It takes 3 generations before you name your children for the gods of the people who destroyed you. Right? Right? No, it's an interesting thing. Why would you do that? Tell me why. Tell me why. Say it again. Integration and assimilation. Why did my mother name me Edward? I asked her once, why did you name me Edward? She said the King of England was named Edward. I named you Edward. I wanted you to become American as quickly as possible.
Why am I thinking Vladimir?
Vladimir's, yes, there you go. I mean, there you go, right? Thank you, Comrade Lenin. I mean, there you go. You, by the 3rd generation, your aim is to become part of the community you live in. So, and that's the question. What you get in the name Mordechai, and Esther, by the way, is the consort. Esther is actually more than Esther. Ishtarte, or Ishtar, is the name of the chief goddess of the East. Now, there's a whole myth about her. Her husband is sent to the underworld. She has to go down there and capture him and rescue him. In order to do that, you'll see this in the myth. In the myth of Ishtar, she has to remove all of her clothes to get past the demons. She gives up her dignity and her identity to get past she uses her sexuality as her only weapon to save her husband from the gods of the underworld. The point here is that this indicates that these people have become part of the land they lived in because they're named for the gods of the place, right? Yes, please, more.
Talmud says that Mordechai married Esther.
Yeah, because the Talmud has to work out this problem of why an unmarried man and a beautiful unmarried woman are living in the same house together. But if that's the case, then how come he gives her to the king? Why doesn't he claim that she's a married woman? Then she would be exempt from. Sorry?
Abraham did the same thing.
Well, yeah, that's true. Yeah, we have this nasty habit of pimping our wives. It's a bad habit. Please don't do this at home. When the king's order and edict was proclaimed, many girls were assembled. Esther, too, was taken into the place. Now, here's the interesting point. We said that Mordechai and Esther, because their names indicate that they are part of the place they live in. But listen to this. Esther did not reveal her people or her kindred, for Mordechai told her not to tell anybody. Right? Why do you suppose he told them not to tell him she's Jewish?
When did it pass?
Because he's not entirely comfortable in the land that he's living in. He's kind of worried about what's going. So he may bear the name Mordechai, and she may bear the name Esther, and they may be part of the kingdom in certain ways, but in other ways they feel, sorry?
Try to be.
They feel alienated. They feel alienated from the world, a little afraid of what happens, right? So she ends up, every single day Mordechai would walk in front of the court to find out how she was, right? Each girl's turn, this is great. Remember those 1950s movies, Sinbad the Sailor? 1950s Hollywood movies about the East. And they were always painted in these pastels. Everyone wore harem pants and had curved swords. Remember, you know what I'm talking about? Yeah, so you got to get, this is what this is. This is fantasy. Each girl's turn came to go to King Ahasuerus at the end of 12 months treatment prescribed for women. 6 months in oil of myrrh, and 6 months with perfumes and women's cosmetics. So they marinated each girl in Chanel No. 5 for a year before she was allowed to go. And then each girl would have like a lottery. All right, it's Thursday the 4th. That's Sharon. It's your turn. And she'd go in and spend the night with the king, and either she'd get a thumbs up or a thumbs down. If she got a thumbs up, she became queen. If she got a thumbs down, she went back to the harem for the rest of her life.
It's a reality show.
It's a reality show. There's a TV show like this? Yes. It's a sex contest.
Basically,
Yeah.
the Jewish myth that if you want a beauty contest is if you actually read the text is crazy.
Yeah. It's worse than that, or more than that. Better than that.
I first understood that in college when I was taking a course in Chaucer.
Yeah.
And there's a tale in Chaucer about the wife of Bath, who's this very sensual woman.
Yeah.
And to justify her way of life, she goes to a list of very lascivious, sensual women in history, and one of them is Esther,
Right.
Queen Esther. And I raised my hand and said, how can it be Queen Esther? She's one of the heroines of the Jewish people.
Right.
And so my professor, do you realize how she became queen?
Right.
So he picked up his Bible, which was a
King James.
King James Bible.
Right, right.
And read it. And
Yeah.
it's a sex contest.
It's a sex contest. Right. It's the
The 12 months of preparation for the most beautiful and enticing
yeah, and smells good.
to the king.
And you have these country girls that you have to get the sheep out of them, and they have to smell like the palace, right? And now the name Esther, the other interesting derivation, it's derived from the Babylonian Canaanite Ishtar, but in Hebrew the word Esther means hidden. Nistar means to be hidden, to be concealed. And that's part of the story. That's where the cosmetics keep coming in, because what you see is never what you get. Everything happens behind a screen or a mask in this story, okay? So what happens is, dum, 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 dum. When Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus in the royal palace, the king loved Esther more than other women. She won his grace and favor more than the virgins. So he set a crown on her head, and she became queen instead of Vashti. Yay. Sometime afterwards, King Ahasuerus promoted Haman. Thank you. Son of Hammedatha the Agagite, that's the connection to Amalek. He advanced him and seated him higher than the fellow officials. Everyone bowed down. All the courtiers in the palace gate bowed and low to Haman, for such was the king order concerning him. But Mordechai would not bow or kneel. Now, why wouldn't Mordechai bow? When we were kids in Hebrew school, they taught us Jews don't bow. But that's not exactly true. I mean, if you go see the king, the Queen of England, you bow. It's nice, you know, it's polite. You don't acknowledge him as God. That's what Haman really wanted. He wanted everyone's, you know, obsequiousness. He wanted everyone to acknowledge him as some sort of God. Sorry? But Mordecai refused to do that. And the more you read, the more you realize that it might not have been simply a religious thing, because the next paragraph is very obscure. It might have been even just personal, right? Right? So they ask him, why don't you bow? Why do you disobey the king's order to bow to Haman? And they told Haman to see whether Mordecai's resolve would prevail. He explained that he was a Jew. Now, what being a Jew has to do with not bowing with Mordecai? But all of that gets mushed up in Haman's eyes. Because for Haman associates Mordecai's intransigence, his unwillingness to submit to Haman's authority, as connected with Mordecai's faith, with Mordecai being a Jew or his nationality. And for Haman, it's not enough just to destroy Mordecai. He has to destroy all of Mordecai's people. And that becomes the notion of, that becomes the source of the genocide. He disdained to lay hands on Mordecai, having been told who Mordecai's people were. And you can read that both ways, by the way. You can read it on one hand that he wants to show Mordecai how powerful he is by not just destroying Mordecai, but by destroying all of Mordecai's people. Right? When you go to in The Godfather, you go to war against the whole family. Right? Or you could look at it more narrowly, or more broadly rather, which is you people are an exception to everybody's rules. You're always the exception, and that's what Haman takes exception to. The fact that Jews are always the exception to the rule. Right? You're always the kid. Everyone sings the Christmas songs except you, damn it. And you're the one who insists on Hanukkah in the classroom, right? And everyone will eat the pepperoni pizza except you. You're the one that wants the vegetarian meal. And you're always the out. You're always the exception. And because you're always the exception, you're the anomaly to anyone's authority. Because authority wants to control uniformly. And you are always the thorn in the side of that authority. You're always the one that demands pluralism, which means diversity, which means exceptionalism, when a system demands uniformity. You Jews are a pain in the neck. And that's what really bothers Haman, because he wants to rule everyone. Not everyone except him or except her. He wants everyone. He wants uniformity. Every great vision of redemption ran into the phenomenon of the Jews, right? You are redeemed if you accept Christ. In fact, the Christian myth was even more better than that. The Christian myth means when you accept Christ, the world will be redeemed. And it's only your intransigence that's keeping you from accepting Christ and us from turning the world into the heaven, to the second coming. That's why they had to kill us during the Middle Ages. Because it was you who were keeping the world from being redeemed. Damn it. Right? And then you get a Marxist, you get a Leninist, with apologies, idea, right? Where the workers of the world unite and will create the workers' republic, and everyone will march in step. Except you Jews won't do that. So what does he have to do? What does Stalin have to do? He has to go kill all the Jewish writers, because they're the ones that are undermining the great vision of communist uniformity. You're always the exception. Hitler wanted blonde, blue-eyed, Aryan, power, culture. You're the exception. So every dictator who wants that kind of uniformity and you become the exception, it just drives him nuts. So what does he do? In the first month, Pur, which means lot, was cast before Haman concerning every day and month until it fell on the 12th month of Adar. How does Haman make decisions? He casts dice. Political decisions in this kingdom are not done because they're prudent. They're done because the stars align, which is this sort of randomness, the arbitrariness. And now you get the great speech. This is the greatest anti-Semitic speech anywhere. It's the classical, paradigmatic anti-Semitic speech. Ready? Haman said to Achashverosh, "There is a certain people, scattered and dispersed among the other peoples in the provinces of your realm, whose laws are different, whose ways are different from those of other people, who do not obey the king's laws. It is not in your interest to tolerate them. If you please your majesty, let an edict be drawn for their destruction, and I'll pay you whatever it costs. There is a certain people who will never mix in, a certain people who will never integrate, a certain people that will never assimilate, a certain people that insist on being different, a certain people that always raises their hand as the exception, as the one who won't eat what we're eating and won't sleep where we're sleeping and won't do as we're doing. There's always this people that wants a special dispensation, and it's just not in your interest to tolerate them because they violate the uniformity of our culture. And besides that, there's something weird about this people. Why did the Babylonians take us into exile to begin with? Because the ancient idea was you take a people off its land, away from its center, away from its language, away from its narrative, plant them in a foreign country, bring them to the imperial capital of Babylon, and they will become Babylonian. That's what happened to the 10 lost tribes, quote unquote. They became Assyrians. They assimilated. That's what happened to every people that the Babylonians conquered, except you guys. You are a pain in the neck. How could it possibly be that a people separated from its land, separated from its language, separated from its culture, you'll be a minority culture in a vast majority culture, stubbornly maintains its uniqueness and distinction from other peoples? It's the only way to explain it is that there's something weird about you guys. There's something uncanny, something unnatural, something demonic. Something demonic. You're the tool of Satan. And rabbis don't tell this very often, but you should hear this from me, right? No, because you see, it scared, it not only did it, it's not that they hated us, they were scared of us. They were scared of us because your existence violates the very laws of sociology that govern the physics of all other peoples. You're not supposed to be here. You take a people off its land, there are no Moabites left anymore, no Amorites, no Midianites. There's no Babylonians left anymore. There's no Canaanites. Ancient Egyptians and modern Egyptians are very different people. But you guys are still here. How do you explain that? Except there's something uncanny. It's frightening. This anti-Semitism is ultimately based on fear of the strange power this people has. That's what he's trying to attack. And he needs to demonstrate that his power is greater than theirs. You get the picture? All right, we all good now? This is the low point of the story. Steve, you look disturbed.
Everything you said, I totally agree with.
You're so smart.
You have one dichotomy here doesn't, don't tell him you're Jewish, he says to Esther. Don't tell him.
Yeah.
Suddenly he's pinned against the wall. I'm Jewish, that's why I'll do it. I mean, I can't understand.
Yeah, because where he is outside the palace, he feels he has the power to do that.
Oh.
He's also a powerful guy. We find that, I didn't give you the whole story, but he is one of the men of the gate. Men of the gate means he's a city councilman. He is one of the important citizens of Shushan. He has stature. He has some stature. So apparently he felt that he could withstand, and people knew who he was. They knew he was a Yehudi. They knew his name was Mordechai. They knew he was a Jew. So he but he's afraid that she, being in the palace, will be vulnerable. Or if you want to be sexist about it, she's a girl. She won't be able to defend herself. I'm a boy. I can take care of myself. Or he's spent his whole life protecting her, and he's afraid of what might come her way. Bruce.
I think it's hard. I don't know this gentleman's name, but
Steve. Steve.
I want to agree with Steve.
Okay, good.
That
You're right.
There's some inherent inconsistency in the story.
Yes.
It's an American story, I think, more than anything.
Okay.
Because you started at the beginning by saying God's not participating in this, but there's a whole series of events, right?
Yeah.
Lots. There's a whole series. She getting picked. It's a meritocracy that they're living in, and I believe that they're living with the inconsistencies that we all live with
Okay.
in terms of our everyday identity in this country. So you can
Spell that out.
very articulate.
I know. Spell that out.
What I was going to say, you can spin it as this is consistent, but I think that Mordecai is inconsistent.
Okay, fair enough.
And just a few paragraphs ago, he was saying to Esther, let's not tell anyone who we are. Let's keep our identity secret. And now he's doing something different.
Yeah.
The same way that all of us, I believe, in our everyday life in this country.
Okay, fair enough.
Our assimilated and our non-assimilated.
Fair enough.
Have to live with those same inconsistencies.
Would it make it any different in your reading of the story if I told you that if you read the whole narrative, this takes place 9 years later? She's been in the palace for 9 years before Haman is elevated. So maybe in the course of time, his sense of insecurity changes. Is that possible?
It is possible.
Okay. All right. Yes. Let's go. Lots of, yeah. Great.
What if he told her to say she wasn't Jewish to get her into the palace?
Yeah.
You know, that it was calculated, I mean,
That he wanted her in the palace?
yeah.
He had some kind of plot to get her into the palace? Yeah? All right. Okay. Yes, please.
Did jealousy play any role, or it was only having their own rules and
Oh, jealousy?
their
Oh, I'm sure jealousy played a role.
only, or jealousy played?
Oh, I think that men jealous? Powerful men jealous of each other? Yes, exactly right.
I'm talking about Jews and non-Jews.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Because it has been
If Mordecai had power, Haman envied it. If Mordecai had property, Haman envied it. Right, exactly right. That's part of it too.
Maybe there is that 9 years difference in her being in the palace and his comfort level with, when Jews have people in powerful positions, we feel like we're empowered and we
Yeah.
feel like we're safe and that we can say, hey, look, I don't have to bow down to you. I'm just like you. I'm a Jew, but I don't have to bow down to you.
Yeah,
Because even if you are powerful and
yeah.
white Protestant, I have somebody in my corner. I have the queen. The queen is
I have the queen, right.
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 So it's not.
Okay, all right. These are great interpretations. Ron.
When I applied to medical school, there was a 10% quota, and the interviewer from Stanford, NS, said, we only take 10% of you guys.
Really? 10% of you guys. Right. Wow. All right, so here's what happens. Look at the, turn a page over. Ready? In classical Jewish thought, when a bad thing happens to us, why does it happen? What? We were evil, and what? And why did it happen? And God brings punishment. So if there's a drought, and we're starving, what does it indicate? We sinned, God punished us. How do we undo that? We fast and repent, God sends rain. If there's an exile, we sinned. We have that in our prayer book, by the way. Mipnei chata'enu, galinu me'artzenu. Because of our sins, we were exiled from our land. In classical Jewish thought, from the book of Deuteronomy, if bad stuff happens, it's because you deserved it. It's your punishment. And the way to undo it is to do tshuva. So look at the next page. When Mordecai learned all that had happened, Mordecai tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and ashes. He went out through the city crying loudly and bitterly. Did that change anything? Why not? Wait a minute. You told me that if bad stuff happens, it's because God made it happen. And if God made it happen, you have to pray and repent. So he prayed and repented, and what resulted from it? Nothing.
This is a godless story.
Nothing. What do you mean nothing? The whole religion is based on the idea that that's how you undo bad stuff. But the book of Esther says, in good Palestinian Persian, gur nicht helfen. It ain't going to help you. That's not going to help you. That's not the way history works, at least in this world, in the world of Esther. That may be the way history works in Deuteronomy. But the Esther world says, ain't going to work. Because that's not how God operates in history. Yes, please, Ellie.
Today's thoughts and prayers are
Right. Our thoughts and prayers are with the children of Parkland. Right. And the young woman who said, I call BS, right? Don't give me your thoughts and prayers. Do something. Do something. So, where does he go to do something? As you said, he has an insider. He goes to the palace gate. And there was great mourning among the Jews with fasting and weeping and wailing and everybody lying about in sackcloth and ashes. But nothing changed. So he goes to the gate. Right? Now the problem is that if the town of Shushan is the happiest place on earth, the palace is even more so. People in the palace are not permitted to know what's going on outside the palace because it might depress them, it might bring wrinkles to their face, it might make them less than beautiful and glorious, right? When they built Disneyland, they built a 20-foot berm, a big hill all around Disneyland, so when you're in Disneyland, you can't see Anaheim. Because Anaheim is depressing. But Disneyland is the happiest place on earth. And you get to go away from Anaheim in Disneyland. It's a world of laughter, a world of... Right? It's a happy place. And that's what the palace is. So she doesn't know what's going on. And this man wearing sackcloth and ashes shows up at the front gate, weeping and wailing and screaming. And someone comes in and says, there's a man at the gate who says he's your uncle and he's a lunatic. So what does she do? She tells security to get rid of him, right? He's a lunatic, right? But that's not what she does. She sent clothing for Mordecai to wear, so he might take off his sackcloth. If you live in the palace, those of you who like reality television, the solution to any personal problem is a makeover. If he's unhappy, we'll give him new clothes. That will make it all better. A makeover. Besides, she's embarrassed. This lunatic is outside and she thinks maybe it is my uncle, right? She hasn't seen him in 9 years. She hasn't talked to him in 9 years. She's become part of the palace. In the palace, if you're unhappy, you put on a new outfit and you'll be just fine because you're supposed to be happy all the time, right? Thereupon, Mordecai sent out Hattach, there's another eunuch, to Mordecai. Esther sent Hattach, and Mordecai told him all that had happened. And he bade inform Esther and charge her to go to the king and appeal to him and plead with him for her people. So Esther told Hattach, take back the following reply. So Mordecai says to the eunuch, we are going to all be murdered, right, on such and such a date. And she sends back this answer, right? Just imagine the Twitter feed, right? Or the text messages, right? Text messages is, murder coming, right? Here's the answer. All the king's courtiers and the people of the king's provinces know that if any person, man or woman, enters the king's presence in the inner court without having been summoned, there's but one law for him, to be put to death. Only if the king extends the golden scepter may he live. Now I have not been summoned to visit the king in the last 30 days. What's her answer?
No.
What's her answer? Yeah, but it's not even that nice. It's palace speak. It's palace speak. He says to her, genocide is coming. She responds with this gobbledygook about palace stuff, palace procedure. The other piece of it is, what has she learned in 9 years in the palace? To be quiet. What did you learn from Vashti? Don't be an uppity woman. I like this gig. I have a charge account at Nordstrom's. I have all the Chanel No. 5 a girl can bathe in. I don't want to lose this gig. She's become a palace person. She's become a palace person. She doesn't want to lose this. And she's learned to be obsequious and acquiescent and quiet. A quiet, subservient woman. Every man's dream. Every king's dream, right? Quiet, subservient. He had Vashti. He doesn't need another feminist. I can't raise my voice. I have to be nice. There was once a time in America when girls were taught to be nice. What does nice mean? Do whatever the men say. Do whatever men... Nice. Yes, please. What are you going to say?
Well, I was just going to say, it's protocol.
It's protocol and it's gobbledygook. Because he's talking genocide and she's talking protocol. He's talking murder and she's talking about, I need to be nice. I can't... She's revealing a new part of her personality. She's become a nice girl. She doesn't raise her voice. So now comes the most important speech in the whole thing, right? Mordecai had this message delivered to Esther. How do you wake her up from this spell? How do you wake her up? How do you dehypnotize her? How do you get her to recognize? Besides, where does she identify now? She doesn't identify with her people, she identifies with the palace. How do you remind her who you are? Right? So here's the great paradox of the book, in case we don't get this at the end. Right? In order to save your people, you've got to have somebody on the inside. But the farther inside you get, the more likely it is you forgot why you were sent there. It's not that power corrupts. It's proximity to power corrupts because it makes you feel like you're one of them, not one of us. You see the problem? So how do you remind her of what and who she is? Mordecai had this message delivered. There's 3 claims. 1, do not imagine that you of all the Jews will escape with your life by being in the king's palace. Which means what? You can't pass forever, honey. Right? Number 2, on the contrary, if you keep silent in this crisis, relief and deliverance will come to the Jews from another quarter. You and your father's house will perish. Now, that's a strange thing. We'll be okay if you don't help us. We'll figure something out. But your connection to your identity, your people, your connection to who you really are, your connection will really die. Think of Joseph in front of his brothers. Remember the Joseph story? We did it a couple weeks ago. The brothers come and Joseph has a choice. Do I want to be associated with these guys? What does it mean to cut yourself off from the only people who know your real name? From the people who know who you are behind the mask? You wear the mask of queenhood, queenship, queen. What does it mean to cut yourself off from the people who know your parents, who know you, who you really are? Is that really what you want to do? A part of you will die. Even if you survive physically, a part of you will die. And finally, he gives her the historical argument. Perhaps you have attained to such a royal position for just such a crisis. Maybe there's an order in history after all. Maybe this is Beshert. Maybe this is why you're there. Maybe this is why you're alive. Maybe this is your moment. Are you really ready to pass it up? And something inside of her wakes up. And the question I'll ask you, which we don't have a lot of time to talk about because we got to finish, is which of the 3 claims woke her up? Which of the 3 claims woke her up? Because she is, as they say today, woke. She wakes up and she says, okay, pray for me, I'll go. And then, then you see where it says number 5? There's the most fun scene in the whole book, which is very ribald, where on the 3rd day, Esther put on royal apparel and stood in the inner court, facing the king's palace, while the king was sitting on his royal throne in the throne room facing the entrance of the palace. As soon as the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court, she won his favor. He extended the golden scepter, which he had in his hand. Esther approached, and touched the tip of the scepter. What troubles you? If it please your majesty, come to a feast. He's a middle-aged guy. What does he do first thing in the morning? He goes and sits on the throne. He's a middle-aged guy with prostate trouble. So what does he do in the morning? Sits on the throne for a long time. What does he hold on to while he's sitting on the throne for a long time? His golden scepter. Okay, that's all I'm going to say. Now read it again, okay? She shows up, she takes the scepter, he says, what can I do for you, you know? That's basically, it's a really funny scene. It's meant to be like wink, wink, funny scene. They come to a feast. And here, the whole Esther theme comes to be because nobody knows what's really going on. Why does the king think he's coming to the feast? Because his queen has asked him, right? And he wants to come and celebrate his queen. He loves the queen. Haman is invited to the feast. Why does Haman think he's coming to the feast? To be honored. Because what glory could you get? What greater glory could you have than being the 3rd among the king, the queen, and Haman? He thinks this is the highest point of his career. I've been taken into the inner circle, right? I'm in the inner circle. And why does Esther think, what does Esther know? Well, that's what's going to happen. So the king, Haman, came to the feast with Queen Esther, and each of them comes with different expectations of what's about to happen, right? And the king again asks Esther at the wine feast, what is your wish, Queen Esther? And what does he expect her to say? Diamonds. What does a girl want? Girl wants diamonds, right? I want diamonds, right? I want diamonds. I want a new outfit. That's what he's expecting, because that's what he hears from queens all the time, right? What is Haman there for? He thinks, boy, I'm right here in the middle of this. And he says, even to half the kingdom it shall be fulfilled. And Queen Esther replied, if your majesty will do me this favor, and if it pleases your majesty, they're building suspense in the soliloquy. Do you hear it? You know, it's like it's coming. You know it's coming, right? And now here comes the denouement. Let my life be granted me as my wish, and my people as my request, for we have been sold, my people and I, to be destroyed, massacred, and exterminated. Now everyone is stone cold sober. Suddenly, the drunkenness leaves the room, and the king turns to his queen and says, who is mi hu zeh ve'ezeh hu? That's the Hebrew. Mi hu zeh, who in hell's name? Mi hu zeh ve'ezeh hu, and which guy would dare do this to my queen? Right? The adversary and enemy, replied Esther, is this evil Haman. Dum, 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 dum. As Haman cringed in terror. Now the next scene, as soon as you get that moment of seriousness, the book switches back to ribald, switches back to slapstick, right? The king in his fury left the wine feast for the palace garden. The king is so angry that his chief advisor would betray him, because the only thing in the world that he wouldn't give Haman is the queen. Right? The only thing that Haman doesn't have power over is the queen, and it's the one thing now that he's trying to take away from the king. Is that who he thinks he is? And the king is so steamed that he goes out in the garden to cool off a bit. And while he's doing that, while Haman remained to plead with Queen Esther for his life, for he saw that the king had resolved to destroy him. And when the king returned from the palace garden, so you imagine, Haman begins blubbering, begging for his life with queen. The queen is lying on a divan, a Chesterfield, right? Lying in a diaphanous chiffon outfit, right? In beautiful makeup, with a glass of champagne. And he now knows his goose is cooked. So he's blubbering his prayers, and as he's blubbering his prayers, he's crawling up the divan until he's sitting on top of her, facing her, because he wants to look in her eyes and plead for his life, which means that where is he effectively lying right now? So that's just the moment the king walks back in the room. The king returned from the palace garden to the banquet room. Haman was lying prostrate on the couch on which Esther reclined. Now, there's many couches and chairs in the palace, but the one place you do not place yourself, the one place you're not permitted to lie is where? On top of the queen. Don't do that. Does he mean, now the king says, does he mean to ravish the queen in my own palace? I mean, you see what he said? Does he think that he's bigger than me? Does he think that I gave him everything in the kingdom except her? And it's the one, I walk back in the room and what do I discover? He's lying on top of my woman, my queen, right?
Where did he come from?
What?
Potiphar's response to.
It's Potiphar, it's all the sex comedies of the Bible, right? No sooner did these words leave the king's lips than Harbona, one of the eunuchs in attendance, there we go again, right? They're the only ones who not only have cojones, they have brains, right? They say, what's more, a stake is standing in Haman's house 50 cubits high, which Haman made for Mordecai. Haman had planned to destroy Mordecai, and he wanted to do it in a special way by hanging him from this giant stake. So the king ordered impale him on it. So the very thing that Haman intended to do to Mordecai got done to him. The very day, so the wheel of fortune turns. And the very fate that Haman intended for Mordecai becomes Haman's fate. And the very position that Haman held becomes Mordecai's position. Mordecai presented himself to the king. The king slipped off his ring, which he'd taken back from Haman, gave it to Mordecai. Mordecai, the Jew, ranked next to King Ahasuerus, was highly regarded by the Jews and popular in the multitude of his brethren. He sought the good of his people and interceded for the welfare of all, and they all lived happily. Wait, don't just one more point, because we're really late, but we might as well finish. So the question is, can you pursue justice in a random world? Should you pursue justice in a random world? Does justice have a career? Does justice have an impact? Does righteousness have an impact? Does morality matter in a random world? And how do you do it? You can't do it through the traditional means of prayer. If you're going to do it, what's the only way you can do it? You have to play the game. You have to play power politics. What's the danger of playing power politics? Worse than losing, you can become like them. You can forget who you are, and the palace corrupts you, and you become Haman. You become part of the machine of injustice. Because you forget who you are, why you're there, and your own values. You forget your identity. That's the biggest problem. How do you remember who you are if you're going to play the game? Right? How do you remember who you are if you're going to play the game? In other words, religion now becomes a different role. Religion's role is not to affect the outcome of political conflicts. Religion is to make sure that political players remember the righteousness that they're charged to pursue. She remembered her identity. She remembered her history. She remembered her narrative. It's a different role for faith in a world where you don't believe that God alone makes justice happen, that justice happens because of political actors who choose to fight for it. But how do you keep the political actors aware of that responsibility? That's the role of Torah in this particular world. That's what Mordechai reminds Esther of. That's the dynamic in the story. But at the end, you don't think so? But at the end of the story, the question is, okay, so this time it worked. Will it work next time? What does it mean to live in an amoral world and to pursue justice in an amoral world? And it's such a difficult question. It's such a painful question. And the only way to really do that, to really face a question like this, is to mask it in the goofiest holiday we got. So in the middle of this goofy holiday, there is this profound question being asked. You want to answer something?
Tell me an instance in history where something similar has happened, where a Jew has gotten close to power and has actually, done that right. Would you say that, like, in the Roosevelt administration, where they had inner Jews, that they actually worked to save Jews during that time?
That's a good
or were they
question.
too close to power?
Leave Jews out for just a second. As a Jewish drama, the question is, how do you survive diaspora?
Yeah.
But think of this as a human drama. How is it that in a world of power politics, with all of its draws, with all of its corruptions, with all of its seductions, does righteousness ever happen? Right? Well, and here's the last question. Dr. Lever has it precisely. Where is God in the story? God is not the God of Exodus throwing plagues on the Pharaoh. You can only see God in the story in the insistence on characters to do righteousness, even if they don't know that righteousness is guaranteed to succeed. That's the God in the story. That's where God plays a role through the human characters of the story, which is a very modern way of thinking about religion. And that really is the ultimate faith of the book of Esther. And Esther means hiddenness. And the question is, how do you pursue justice in a world where God is hidden? That's the great question. We have to stop. Let's wish you a happy holiday. We'll see you Wednesday night. Come Wednesday night.